All right, recording is going. So let's get started. So we're going to do units 1, 2, and 3 first. They're relatively short, and then we're going to move to the DBQ, which is on those units. So our first unit 1 and 2, the overview of the unit is early world contact with the New World. So we're going to discuss the Columbian Exchange, native populations, slavery in the New World, Europeans and Native Americans fighting for control of the continent, and the causes for colonialization. Okay, so we're going to go through each of those points, and we're going to discuss those. So first, who discovered America? Columbus, right? So it's really the Nordic Vikings, but for our intents and purposes, it's Christopher Columbus. Sure, most of you know the story. He went to Spain, said, let's go to India, went the wrong way, and he discovered North America. So the native populations that lived in North America before Columbus arrived, the pre-Columbians, are the Pueblo, the Chinook, and the Plains Indians. You don't really need to know them by name, but just the Pueblo are in the desert, Chinook or in the Pacific Northwest, and the Plains Indians are nomadic. Yeah, Kyle?
We have to know why Columbus only got sponsored by the Spanish.
That's more of a concern for a European course rather than the actual AP European history or United States course. I'm gonna leave a couple, not a lot of things, but things that they're not gonna ask you out. They are not gonna ask you specific dates. They're not gonna ask you about battles. They're going to ask you about the significance of themes, and they're going to ask you about the significance of certain diplomacy, political things, but not certain battles. No one's going to ask what was George Washington's battle strategy at the Battle of Saratoga. That's not a question you're going to get asked. So the Columbian Exchange is the exchange of plants, animals, diseases between the New World and the Old World. Mainly, this is known for 95% of the native population getting wiped out by smallpox because of the Europeans. The Columbian Exchange also opened the door for European exploration and colonization of the Americas. Spain started out colonizing first, and then once the Armada was defeated, it was followed by Britain, France, and the Dutch. So the colonial powers. Spain is our main colonial power for the first few hundred or so years, and they're eventually overtaken. The conquistadors were the Spanish sort of explorers who went through the lands, killed the native people, and conquered them. The encomienda system of Spain was a institutionalized slavery, basically. If you can see the top right-hand corner, Spanish people are always at the top of the hierarchy, and then all the way at the bottom is the enslaved people or the Africans that were brought over. So the encomienda system, also its purpose functioned as to convert these people to Catholicism. For you guys in AP Euro last year, Bartholomew de las Casas, who we'll talk about down here, he details some of the brutality shown from the Spanish to the native populations. I put a little note here. This will most definitely come up on the exam. They love to ask about Bartholomew de las Casas. I looked up 5 practice exams, and all of them had an SEQ or at least a couple multiple choice questions about Bartholomew de las Casas. So what you need to know, he was a priest, he had a lot of sympathy for the natives, and he detailed the actual devastation and death of them. So, and we also talked about the death of the natives was mainly due to disease rather than blood and conquest.
So Bartholomew was Spanish?
He was a Spanish priest.
But
he went to the New World. He saw the brutality. He saw what was going on. He wrote it down, and then he showed it to a bunch of people, and he was like, this is crazy. This is terrible. We shouldn't be doing this. It's actually mainly printed in Britain. They hated the Spanish, so they printed that little leaflet like wildfire just for some propaganda purposes. But that's really not relevant for the American history course. Yeah.
What an example of Bartholomew in a test question, how did his influence or what was his view?
They asked yeah, they would give you a passage of the actual short account of the destruction of the Indies, and then they would say something along the lines of which of the following you know what I mean. It would be what they wouldn't ask you a specific question or anything like that. but they might ask you some things about like the Catholic response to sort of colonization, that kind of things. All right. Oh, and could you just shut the door? All right. So yeah.
So besides his count, what else did he do to?
It's not really relevant to the course. He just did some evangelizing things. He converted people to Christianity, but for the course, really, just his account is what actually matters.
So how did everyone in Spain like feel about this? 'Cause, like,
I mean, a lot of them, especially like the wealthy people, they love this because, I mean, God, gold, and glory, as the little expression goes, they were getting really rich from it, especially the spice trade that they got through it from the Americas. They were getting a lot of resources, a lot of wheat, a lot of grain. And this also affects the common person of Spain who was eating better. They ate different foods and more sustainable foods.
so like, did they become like mad at Bartholomew? Like, they didn't really care about what you're saying.
No, I mean, it was just really, Bartholomew was one of the only people who was kind of going against the wind and saying, like, hey, maybe we shouldn't be enslaving these people. Maybe that's not the right thing to do. Does someone else have a question? No? Okay. So the other colonial power is the British. So the British defeat the Spanish Armada in around 1609. They defeat the Spanish Armada in one of the wars of Philip II. It's not relevant. But just know Britain becomes a colonial power after they defeat the Spanish Navy, which was preventing them from going to the New World. So the British had joint stock companies, which were basically exploratory committees into settling North America. Some of these joint stock companies were Jamestown and Roanoke. Jamestown was settled by Sir Walter Raleigh, and Roanoke by actually that's flipped. Jamestown was Captain John Smith, and Roanoke was Sir Walter Raleigh. Roanoke is relevant because it is the lost colony. Roanoke died after a week, most likely due to starvation or invasion from neighboring Native American tribes. Yeah, lost colony, ghost town is what it's referred to usually. Jamestown was a little more successful, but it really did not have any vested. They kind of deserted it. That's actually Jamestown right there. They really used it for commerce and sort of trading than anything else, and it eventually died out because the Europeans did not know how to farm and settle the land. So, I mean, Jamestown also grew tobacco. So the cash crops will start to show up with Jamestown. So, yeah, money is a big one. So the Chesapeake is by Washington.
Maryland, Chesapeake Bay?
Yeah, it's by Washington, D.C., Maryland, that area. Very fertile, very, very good land. A lot of people came from Britain to the New World because they were very poor people. And if you were a poor person in Britain, you could not vote. You had to own land. And these poor people did not own land. So the British said, and these companies said, if you come to America, we will give you land and we will give you money. If they had land, that means they could vote. So this was a key to enfranchisement of poor people. So a lot of poor people, single men, single fathers especially, went to the Americas, got some land, and thus got their right to vote. So that was our indentured servitude. So these companies promised, hey, if you do hard labor for us for 10 years, you will be a free man and you will own 50 acres of land. This really is slavery, just in a different way. So the headright system is what I just talked about, the acres of land. It is 50 acres of land given to colonists for coming to the New World. So these British poor people would be given were promised, at least not really given most of the time, were promised 50 acres of land in exchange for their hard labor and their hard work. Yeah, Moscow?
Who gave them this land?
So originally when Spain kind of discovered the New World, they separated it with Portugal, that they had the whole left side and Portugal had the whole right side of the hemisphere in the world. When Britain comes along, they really don't follow any of the treaties and they kind of just do whatever they want. So just for our intents and purposes, like sort of like this, Britain takes this part, the red, France will take this blue part, and Spain will take this brown part. So that's all we really need to know, not about the treaties or anything like that. Yeah, Kyle?
At this point, do they have like a governing body or anybody in charge of North America?
No, so it would really be like colonies don't start to really show up until like later. Like think of it like if Elon Musk went to space. Like that's not a government colony he would set up somewhere. He's really setting up a business venture for growing things or whatever he's doing. That's really what this more was. These are more corporations doing what they want instead of governments exploring the lands. Yeah, Marcus.
So when indentured servants who came to the Americas, were they considered colonists now?
They were colonists once they were free. So they weren't free people under indentured servitude, but once they got out, they were considered colonists and free people. Yeah, Jake.
So they would get the deed of land.
Most did not. Few did, but it's sort of like a promise that really wasn't given. They were usually given some parts of the land, but not usually the full 50 acres.
They could be given land.
Yeah,
This is what point those people are like, oh, this is what happened. if you do this.
yeah, they weren't really the best people. They cared about money more than anything. Anything else? Can I move on? Cool. So France is our only other really colonial power that we'll talk about. So France, they colonized Quebec, this sort of top eastern blue region up here. They were much nicer to the Native Americans than the Spanish and the British were. The British really, we didn't really talk about this, but they started the wars of extermination where they started exterminating the Native Americans and started killing them. But the French were much nicer, probably due to the fact that they were much weaker and they did not have an actual military presence in the New World until much later. They converted the natives as the Spanish and British had to Roman Catholicism. They started exploring the land for natural resources and things like that. They were looking to open markets. So a big market that will open up is fur. So we will see a war called the Beaver War that will be over the beaver fur. That's in the Ohio River Valley. They were concerned with that sort of fur. Tensions between Britain and France would escalate and over combating territory where they would expand. So a big one is the Appalachian Mountains. France and Britain were sort of competing for who deserved or who really had the right to the certain land in that period. Yeah.
Doesn't this lead to the 7 Years' War?
Yeah, it is an inevitable force that will lead to the 7 Years' War. So if you get something called analyze the cause and effect of the 7 Years' War, a big one is the inevitable expansion of the colonial forces of France and Britain. Okay? And then the Haitian Revolution. Haiti is not on this map, but it is somewhere in the Caribbean, for all of you who do not know. The Haitian Revolution is a slave revolt. It is the only successful slave revolt in history. So if that, you might see that brought up somewhere, but really for all intents and purposes, not that relevant. Okay. So here's where we get to the part of the first Thanksgiving. So we get to the Pilgrims. So the Pilgrims are Puritans. These Puritans broke away from the Anglican Church due to reasons that are not really that important to us. We just have to know that they did not like the Church of England and they broke away from them. So these Puritans went from Europe to North America and they settled on the Mayflower and went to Plymouth. A big common misconception here is people say the Pilgrims fled Britain for religious tolerance. This is not true. They did not tolerate any religion besides their own. So this is not a sort of place in America with the Pilgrims where they were happy and they accepted all religions, Catholics, Protestants, Puritans, whatever. That is not true. They did not like Catholics. They were only Puritans. Okay? So these Puritan separatists, they're called separatists because they break away from the church, come to Plymouth on the Mayflower. The biggest part about the Mayflower that you need to know is the Mayflower Compact. This compact states that the right to govern does not come from the king, does not come from God. It comes from the people. So the people have to have the will to be in the government for it to be a powerful government. This is a big difference from the divine right of kings in Britain, the divine right of kings in France, and the divine right of kings in most of Europe. So these separatists and these Puritans and these Pilgrims were given some support from the Native Americans. This is the Squanto, the Pocahontas story, where they teach them how to farm, they teach them how to make grain, that sort of stuff. that allows the that allows the pilgrims to survive through the winter. So the big difference between these pilgrims, between our first settlers, which these aren't businessmen, these aren't men coming over, these are entire families coming from Europe to the Americas and settling and living there. So these whole families are coming here, and just think about it as they're repopulating with each other. This is a way more permanent home than it was prior. So we are going to see actual colonies start to develop. So settlers of South Carolina, yeah, Moscow.
The reason all these people are coming from Europe is because they're like treated poorly there. They're poor.
Yeah.
They want to start a new life with their families, and this is the best way to do it.
Yeah, so if you remember from last year, right? England was constantly at war with each other over their religion, right? So the kings and the queens and etc. They would start killing their people because they didn't like the Protestants, or they didn't like the Catholics, or whatever. So these people were fleeing religious persecution, but they were not setting up religious tolerance. They were just fleeing religious persecution.
So like the Puritans be an example of people that
Yeah, they were fleeing persecution against them from the British government. Yeah.
How long was like the conversation of the women after Jamestown?
I think it's about 50 years or so. It's about 40 years. So I mean, that sort of business marketing and that sort of commercialization does actually take a while until the Puritans are forced out and their only option is to flee Britain in order to survive. Anything else? Okay, cool. So for South Carolina, these settlers came from Barbados. These settlers brought with them slaves. This is a very important thing for you to know. This is the first example of institutionalized slavery in America. There were slaves before with the Spanish, but this is the first example of institutionalized slavery in America, where slaves were really brought in and grew cash crops as they had done in Barbados. That was very, very profitable. So this is America's first taste of sort of commercial slavery, if you could call it that. Okay. So as there happened to be, there were many, many conflicts with the natives. You don't need to know these specific wars, the Powhatan Wars, the Beaver Wars, the Pequot Wars. The Beaver Wars are the ones I talked about with the fur. You don't really need to know like what they were about. You just need to know that they happened. So there was an increasing conflict with the Native Americans and the Puritan settlers. Yeah, Marcus.
Settlers means South Carolina.
Yeah, so this is the South Carolina settlers. So that's why it says SC. Anything else? Cool. Let's move on. So colonial trade is also a big aspect for the British. The British did not, when they eventually, the government started coming to the Americas, they did not come for sort of the mercantilism of opening the resources. They came to open markets. They saw the Americas as a place where they could sell their goods more than they saw it as a place where they could like get the resources and sort of do it like that. So salutary neglect is the phase where the British government is hands-free of the Americas. They interfere in the conflicts and all that jazz as little as they possible, as little as they possibly can. So the sort of settlers that exist there, this is around the 1700s or so. The settlers that exist in the Americas, they have their own right to self-autonomy. They have the right to govern themselves, really free of the British. Because the British take a step back and say, we're a little busy with the France and we're a little busy with Europe. We're just going to take a step back and let you do what you want to do. So this is also, we got to remember, right? Britain and America are very, very far away from each other. This will come into play with the American War of Independence and also the 7 Years' War. Okay. So trade is a very big asset for the Americas. Mercantilism, it is the economic policy under which nations sought to increase their own specie. Specie is just the word for like raw material, wealth, and power. So if we go back to sort of God, gold, and glory, that is the sort of epitome of mercantilism. Gold meaning wealth, and glory meaning power and sort of national standing. So this is a very important term you should know. You should know mercantilism by its name. Okay. So as I just mentioned, the Americas were seen as markets for British goods more than it was seen for resources. And near the 1750s or so, when they started to migrate towards a flourishing economy and that kind of things, the British started enacting tariffs on the Americas. So there are 3 tariffs you really don't have to know per se, but you should know their effects. It's the Navigation Act, the Wool Act, and the Molasses Act. So this is really where we kind of see the end of salutary neglect, when the British start putting acts and putting tariffs on the Americas. Okay. So for the Molasses Act, it's probably the only one you need to know. There is a refusal to pay by colonists, and this is sort of our precursor, our early example of colony rebellion. So major events of this unit, yeah, Jason.
Same thing as the Sugar Act.
No, the Sugar Act will come later. The Molasses Act is actually a higher tax than the Sugar Act. We'll talk about the specifics of it later. But all you really need to know is the Sugar Act is just really more like restricting than the Molasses Act. It's less about sugar and more about having the right to control their colonies. Yeah. The acts, I want to say like 17. The Sugar Act? I think it's like the 17.
Molasses and wool.
Oh, Molasses, Wool, and Navigation. Navigation is really the only one that kind of actually works out, and it's good for the colonists that they have to buy their goods from England. Actually, it helps them a lot, but they just didn't like it because they felt restricted. I mean, mercantilism is just like an economic principle where it's like if Donald has 50 gold pieces and I have 100 gold pieces, the only way to increase my wealth is to take it from Donald. So like I can't make my own wealth, I have to steal it from him. So the British kind of saw the Americas as a way to kind of kick their Spanish and French rivals, say, I have all these markets, I have all these things, and you have nothing. So I am a better mercantile power than you are.
Taking over, taking power from others. Growing your economy by taking others.
Yeah. The only way to grow your economy is to take from others.
Didn't you use like God, gold, and glory for it?
Yeah, God, gold, and glory is the Euro expression for that. God is their God is the Americas. They wanted to convert them to Catholicism. Gold is the resources found in the Americas, and glory is the nationalism, is the mercantilism aspect of saying like I am the best colonial power. I'm so great. Cool little couple darts. So the major events. Yeah.
Can you infer what a dart is?
No. So the major events of this time period is the New England Confederation. So this is the Confederation of settlers in New England in 1643. This is just a really loose sort of. It's not a government. It's kind of just a treaty. Like if the natives attack me, you help me take care of the natives. And it was formed without the Crown's authorization. That is probably the actual major takeaway from that. The New England Confederation formed without approval from the British Crown. Okay. The next major event you need to know is Bacon's Rebellion. Bacon's Rebellion was an armed rebellion in Virginia where William Berkeley, he was a supporter of the British government. Forces from England sort of put down this rebellion, and the New England Confederation had to reform the colonial government, and it was more directly controlled by the British. So Bacon's Rebellion is a marker where the British sort of take more control of their economies and take away their sort of self-autonomy. Yeah. It's mainly, so the governor of Virginia is a proxy for the British Crown. So this is when the states were still run by the Brits. Yeah.
So when did Bacon's Rebellion happen?
I want to say like late 1600s. Dates don't matter, but I mean, obviously, like, what century is it in matters or something like that. Yeah.
Before this, they were relatively self-autonomous.
They regulated themselves. Yeah. Okay. The other major event is the Salem witch trials. Most of you know the Salem witch trials from the Crucible and from things like that. John Proctor, sure. The big takeaway from the Salem witch trials is the halfway covenant. You don't really need to know the specifics. It's something about birthright and that kind of thing. All you need to know is the Puritans were increasingly having higher tensions and were increasingly splitting with each other. The last event you need to know is the First Great Awakening. So the Great Awakening is the religious revival of the colonies. So we see a spark of evangelism in the Puritans with George Whitefield and Jonathan Edwards. They preached a message of atonement for your sins, and they brought sort of a religious aspect to the mid-century America. Yeah, so, I mean, these are major events like you should know.
Yeah.
There's going to be about 5 or 6 from each unit like you should know by name. So these are events I think you should know by name, especially. And basically the First Great Awakening, you just know the religious splits in the colonies are becoming deeper and wider. Jason, you had a question?
They're like the opposite of like what later happened to deal with enlightenment.
Yeah, they use sort of Enlightenment kind of precursor ideas, but instead of messages of tolerance and accepting each other, they say like, you're not a Puritan because you were born with a ill-blooded mother or something like that. Like they were really like not friendly people. Puritans are really bad people, by the way. I don't know if I kind of got that across. They were very like kind of brutal, and the Quakers are the only really pacifist sort of people. Like they brutally killed the Native Americans, like terribly, and they justified it with saying God wants me to. So, congratulations, or no, not yet. Go back.
No, I've honestly learned more.
So these are all. If you want, all these terms I'm using are on the Quizlet. So if you don't want to type these down, you can literally just copy them. Yeah, Moscow. I'm going to also share the slideshow. Yes. Are we good?
For your catch-ups.
Yeah, I should.
I got like learn, so we have like
Yeah, we have a week barely. Do I have what? I think you guys have a much higher chance if you listen to me versus if you don't. All right. Okay, I'm moving on. Right? Cool. Just go on the slideshow. Just look on the Quizlet. So this is our last slide for this unit. So colonial trends. All you need to know is just the important sort of trends in the course. They're not going to ask you like, what is the sort of northern thing? What they're going to ask you is sort of the split between like the trends in the nation. So like when we get to the Civil War, if we talk about the North and South, they're not going to ask you like what was happening in Ohio. They would say something like, did Ohio have sentiments against the South? Well, explain your reasoning. And then you would say something like, Ohio was a northern state, the North hated the South, blah, 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 blah. Like that's the sort of trend they'd be looking for. So the New England colonies, so New Hampshire to Rhode Island to sort of Massachusetts up there, those are prioritized on trade. The middle colonies, Pennsylvania, New Jersey, New York, they're focused on farming. The southern colonies is the cash crops and slavery that we saw from Barbados and tobacco and that sort of things. Cotton isn't in the Americas yet. It will come very soon though. Kyle? Was there any other reason that North hated the South besides the slaves? There's a lot of reasons. We could get to that, but we're gonna focus on this now, and we'll see if we can get to that. Yeah.
So like when we were talking about like the West, like a little bit more West, that's just gone now.
The West.
Yeah.
So we're in the So these are all the British colonies. So this unit really focuses, the next unit too, will focus on the British colonies. The British colonies are the 13 colonies are what we call America eventually. So the Spanish colonies eventually get overrun by the Mexicans declare independence and they fight their war. It's irrelevant. France gets pushed out eventually, but this is just they still exist, but this is just a small map. Yeah, Jane.
So for this unit, we just have to know France, colony.
So for units 1 and 2, we did 2 units, by the way. This is our last slide. Yeah, we already did 2 units. So this is sort of what it looks like in 1740. And that's really what we have to be. Okay. So the France really don't have that too many tensions with the actual Indians or Native Americans. It doesn't really matter what you call them. Just know they were a lot nicer to them, probably because they kind of had to be, because they did not have the military force to sort of beat them up. Are we good, Jaden?
Do we have to know the upbringings of like certain colonies or states?
Not really. As of now, on this side, only New York, Pennsylvania, or only New York, Virginia, and Maryland are royal colonies. You don't need to know that. You don't need to know what the difference is between a provincial colony and a royal colony. It's not relevant to the course. I mean, they won't ask you about it. That's what I mean by that.
What about like Pennsylvania and like all the Quakers? And, like,
They don't. So the Quakers do break off from the Puritans and they go to Pennsylvania, maybe, or mainly. They sort of have their own little like commune. They don't really have too much control with the government and with that kind of thing. Just know about the Quakers. They're pacifists and they did not want war when we get to them. All right, so that is units 1 and 2 done. So I have review questions. So just to see if
We just got through more.
we just got.
1 year in 30 minutes.
Yeah.
We,
Dude, we passed that.
Yeah.
We had Bacon's Rebellion last month.
I think I've learned more about
I'm like.
I
don't know.
Dude, I feel like you look stuff up like Google, like what should I teach my
I think
US
it's like.
this is. I took all these pages and I made them into a condensed slideshow. So, all right. So it's the yeah. If you want to get this, honestly, I don't recommend you get it. It's way too late for you to do anything with it. Kind of sorry, but just look up practice tests if you really care. So the first question is, which of the following statements about indentured servitude is true? A. Indentured servitude was the means by which most Africans came to the New World. B. Indentured servitude never attracted many people because its terms were too harsh. C. Approximately half of all indentured servants died before earning their freedom. Or D. Indentured servitude was one of the several systems used to distinguish house enslaved people from field enslaved people. So no, we're gonna do it like this. How many people think it's A? Raise your hand. Approximately half of all indentured servants died before earning their freedom. Which of the following statements about indentured servitude is true? Is it A? Raise your hand. Is it B? Raise your hand. Is it C? Raise your hand. Is it D? Raise your hand. So the correct answer is C. So even if you did not learn that statistic specifically, you should have recognized that indentured servitudes were working towards their freedom. So the key word in the sentence is died before earning their freedom. And if you know that earning your freedom is a part of indentured servitude, you should have got that with the question. And so if the house enslaved thing, that doesn't come up till.
Wasn't it like mostly like 7 years for that work?
I think it for this it's specifically 10. It might be 7 with certain Irish and Italians, but just know it was a time. It was a time period. All right. Next question. The Mayflower Compact foreshadows the U.S. Constitution in which in the following ways: A. It posits the source of government in the people rather than in God. B. It ensures both the right to free speech and separation of church and state. C. It limits the terms of office for all government officials. D. It establishes 3 branches of government in order to create a system of checks and balances. The Mayflower Compact foreshadows the U.S. Constitution in which of the following ways: A. It posits the source of government in the people rather than in God. It is A.
Yes.
The first important cash crop in the American colonies was correct. The philosophy The philosophy of mercantilism holds that economic power resides primarily in. The philosophy of mercantilism holds that economic power resides primarily in.
Selling more than you buy. No, it's
No, taking wealth from like there's a finite amount of wealth in the world you have to take from other people. Yeah.
Yes, or a positive trade balance in hard currency is the other way it's called. Yeah. Which of the it's not really relevant. The earliest European settlements in North America were largely centralized around New England, the Chesapeake Bay, and the St. Lawrence River, except for the following associated with which European power? Is it A, Spain, B, France, C, England, or D, the Netherlands? Spain. It is Spain. Spain was in Mexico and Florida. They were not in sort of that region that we're talking about there. Yeah, no, that's that. So we're so France. So the Saint Lawrence. This is the Saint Lawrence River is right here. So this is the heart of French territory. All right, so that is units 1 and 2. Congratulations.
We're not a third way there, but we're going.
We're a third way now.
I'm gonna make it APUSH remix.
So we are now on unit 3. So unit 3 is American independence. It is conflict and independence. There are 9 units. So after we do this, we'll be a third of the way done. Yeah, Marcus.
How much of the test has 1 and 2?
Units 1 and 2 will comprise 10% of the test. That's what they say. I don't know if it's true. I'll see you on. 10%. No, one through 2 is 10%.
So if you have 9 units, will we go through like 4 to 6 hours a day?
I mean, my availability is a little stretched. I'll try my best to sort of get it done, but you guys, I know, aren't, but you should be self-studying. Yeah. Okay, so Unit 3, Conflict and American Independence. So we start off with the Albany Plan of Union. The main takeaways of the Albany Plan of Union is that it is a government system of collecting taxes and the defense of the colonies from the Native Americans. It is unsuccessful. This is pioneered by Benjamin Franklin. No one comes to his little party where he sort of tells people, let's do this, because they don't want to be ruled by a strong federal power. They like each other and they like their sort of autonomy they have on their own. This is where the famous join or die poster comes from. So that's why, if you ever seen that, it's sort of Ben Franklin saying, like, screw you to the people who didn't come to his party. It's basically what it is. It's also propaganda, but it's whatever. So the 7 Years' War. Lynch, what's the cause of the 7 Years' War?
Conflicts between the
And
then expansion of France and England into the United States.
Yeah. So conflicting expansion between the French and the British lead to the 7 Years' War. The 7 Years' War is an inevitable result of colonial expansion. It is over really the Ohio River Valley. So I mean, you know where Ohio is, right? It's over sort of Ohio. So there is a lot of beavers in Ohio, and they like the fur. So they compete over the fur rights, and eventually it goes through an all-out war conflict. The 7 Years' War is mainly a European war, but we're just going to focus on the American part. You may also see it called the French and Indian War. It's a little confusing because the French and the Indians were on the same side. Yeah, they were on the same side. They were not against each other. The Indians mainly sided with the French and the British when it came, well, the French for this, and then the British for the actual American Revolution, because the colonists were really, I mean, they killed them a lot more than the Brits and the French did. Yeah.
Question about the political poster again. Like you said, you would go to drag. That's what Ben Franklin said. If they didn't join his party, would you be part of his side?
Yeah, so he posits the Albany Plan of Union, and they don't like this because they don't want a strong sort of federal like collective union. So they like their own sort of states thing. And he says Ben Franklin says, if you do not join my union, if you don't join the Albany Planting Union, you're going to die on your own from the Indian attacks from Native Americans. Okay. So the results of the 7 Years' War is that England gets control of Canada and everything east of the Mississippi, which was once French territory. France keeps the sort of Louisiana, and then that sort of like, if you know on a map, like it kind of tails into like Montana and sort of Nebraska, that area. They keep that territory, which will not be sold until the Louisiana Purchase. France prioritizes their two small profitable islands over their large territory. So this is our example of mercantilism. France cares a lot more about their profitable islands than their big, vast amount of land. So it is profit over land. George Washington is seen as a hero, even though he was terribly defeated in battle. He is a British commander who comes to the Americas. He fights the Indians, gets absolutely decimated, and then goes back to his hometown, and they welcome him as a hero. So this is sort of our first precursor to George Washington becoming the president and sort of becoming a national hero. The also corollary effect of the 7 Years' War is immense British debt. The British are very, very poor now because they spent all their money on this war, and they expect the Americas to pay for it. But the Americas say, I served in this war for you. What the hell am I paying for? So this is sort of where we get the taxes that the colonists deem unacceptable because the British are unjustly imposing them onto it. So this is the end of salutary neglect. So up to now, we've enjoyed sort of this self-autonomy in the colonies, but the British come along and end it in 1763. This is the proclamation of 1763 that forbids the settlement of lands past the Appalachians. So on a map, right, this is like our colonies. This is the Appalachian Mountains, and then we have our whole country over here. The Brits said you cannot go past this line and settle this area. So the French and the Indian, or not the French, the Indians or the Native Americans maintain control of this area, while the colonists are sort of barred by the Appalachian Mountains. They obviously did not like this because why is Big Brother, the British, telling me what to do? I'm a free colonist man. This was our first step to what we'll call Road to Revolution. So this is our first major step to what will be the American War for Independence. So the Sugar Act, Jason's not here, but okay. The Sugar Act, the Currency Act, and the Stamp Act come into play here. These acts are not the intolerable acts. Do not get those two confused. These acts just regulate sort of the British power in the colonies. And a lot of colonists see these as a British overstep into their lives. So you should just have a general understanding of what each of the acts did. The Sugar Act targeted molasses smugglers. They were tried in British courts. That is a actual big thing. So before this act, the Americans enjoyed their own sort of court systems they had. So if you were a colonist, you were tried in a colonist court. But this act made it so if you were a smuggler of molasses, you were not tried in colonist court, you were tried in British court. So the sort of, so the colonists deemed it unfair because like it was like imagine if imagine if Britain today came and started setting up court of laws in our country. Like we're not going to be happy with that, right? Like imagine if you committed a crime and you were tried in British court and everyone was talking in these accents. Like you don't like that. The colonists really did not like that. They liked the sort of legal precedent they had in their lives. They didn't. Yeah, so there are like there's taxes on the molasses. The Sugar Act taxes are actually a lot less than the Molasses Act taxes, but just mainly for the Sugar Act, they targeted the molasses smugglers in the courts. That's the biggest takeaways you have to know. So the Currency Act forbade the colonists from creating their own paper money. So this is just a more example of them telling the colonists what not to do, what to do. Yeah, Jimmy?
The main reason for these acts is to pay for the great debt.
Yeah, the great debt they also had. And they also kind of felt that they were losing their grip on their colonies. And sort of they gave these acts to make sure they maintained their control of the colonies, which actually gave the opposite effect and slipped out the colonies even more. So the last act is the Stamp Act. The Stamp Act specifically targeted colonists for their revenue. It's a broad tax. It basically taxed everything. Do you have a deck of cards? Tax. Do you have a legal document? Tax. So this sort of tax was a revenue tax for the British, who were basically using the Americas as cash cows for their immense debt. So James Otis is a prolific writer. He writes the phrase "no taxation without representation." So this is where we first sort of see that saying. The Sons of Liberty is headed by Samuel Adams. They mass protest this act, and before the Stamp Act is even put into place, it is repealed. So the act doesn't even get passed, and because the colonists rebelled and protested it so much, they burned the courts especially, that the British had to repeal the act before it even got passed. So virtual representation is sort of the no taxation without representation that comes up. The British Parliament felt as if the colonists were virtually represented by the own MPs, by the own members of the Parliament. So if you're in America, even though you don't vote for the Parliament, the British saw that you were represented by those people who were there. So the sort of Thomas Paine thing that will come up, you should know who Thomas Paine is, by the way. We'll talk about him further. It's like, how can an island rule a continent? And that's something that will come up with both virtual representation and also with the American War for Independence. So the Township Acts also come up after this. It is a response to the Stamp Act and their slipping of power. They create more royal courts, more taxes, and it completely suspended the New York legislature because they refused to comply with British regulations and British rules. So the colonists obviously don't like this, and they start a circular letter. So the Massachusetts circular letter is a letter sent to all the colonies, all 13 of them, to protest the new acts in unison. So this is our sort of first element of colonial unity. These are still states, but we share a common brethren and we share a common enemy in the British. An important thing to know, as of now, there's no talks of independence in the Americas. No one is talking about independence. Everyone is talking about how do we reform this, how do we fix this, what's the solution to this problem, not how do we get away from the British. So the Brits tell the committees to not talk about this letter, which only leads the colonies to only discuss this letter. So American opinion at this time is sort of this anti-British sort of fever among the patriots and among most American people. The loyalists in the country are pro-British and will be loyal through the revolution. So the Boston Massacre is not a massacre. It is a highly propagandized event by the colonists against the Brits. So 5 people died. The first man who died is probably actually a black man, but that's not an important thing. Yes. So the way the Boston Massacre sort of goes, the story is, it's a little debated, but what probably happened is colonists put rocks inside snowballs and started throwing it at the redcoats, started throwing at the British soldiers. The British soldiers were mainly teenagers in Boston at this time, and they were scared, and one of them got hit in the head apparently with a rock and started bleeding. So in order to defend themselves, they shot at the colonists. Samuel Adams and the Sons of Liberty will run with this, and they will say that the crowd of redcoats shot into an innocent crowd of bystanders. They specifically used women and children as if like the British were shooting at little kids running on the street who were playing with snowballs. And this changes the fever in America to very anti-British. John Adams, who will be the second president of the United States, actually defends these soldiers in court and gets them off. He says that it was not their right, but their obligation. Yeah.
So just like random people in the Americas throwing snowballs at British soldiers?
Yeah, so a couple like imagine like kids our age started throwing snowballs with rocks inside them at cops, and the cops were getting pretty hit badly, so they shot at us, right? I mean, the national media would hate that, and there would be a lot of media attention to that. So you can kind of think of that as if it happened in the United States, or if it happened in the colonies.
And then who defended who?
John Adams, yeah, the second president of the United States. He's a lawyer. he defends the British soldiers in court and gets them off. Because he thought that was the law. That's how he made money. So the Boston Tea Party is 3 years later than this. And so the Sons of Liberty, disguised, led by Samuel Adams, disguised as Mohawks, Native American population, dump 10,000 pounds of tea into the harbor. 10,000 pounds in the sense of currency, not weight. So pounds is British currency. Yeah, it's British currency. So it's $10,000 worth of British currency into the harbor. In response to this, Britain passed the coercive acts, or as they're called in the colonies, the intolerable acts. They closed the Boston Harbor. They put British soldiers in civilian homes, the Quartering Act. They convinced the colonists that their days of self-autonomy are completely over. The colonies are now under direct rule by the crown. So this is the Boston Massacre. This is the actual pamphlet used, I'm pretty sure. I mean, if you look at this, who looks like the aggressors here? The British, right? And these colonists are dead on the ground, like as if they did nothing. This one has his back turned, which probably means got his back turned, and he's shot in the back, which probably means that he was running away. He was not an aggressor. He was an actual defender. Yeah.
Are you saying that you don't really think it was like in that case?
As it's interpreted historically, it is really not the British's fault. They're sort of provoked into attacking the Americans, but it's a little skewed because of how propagandized and how politicized the event is. And Marcus,
Why did the colonists start throwing the snowballs just for fun?
they didn't like the British, so they got drunk. It was on the holidays. They got drunk and started throwing rocks at the British soldiers.
You know that the black one is Christmas Adams, right?
Yeah.
Christmas Adams. So who was the acts? The acts, basically rebellion of the British after the colonists dumped them.
So the British passed the Intolerable Act in their own parliament in retaliation to the Boston Tea Party.
Yeah, and that's where the colonists dumped 10,000
Yeah.
pounds.
They dumped 10,000 pounds in it before the Intolerable Acts. So the Intolerable Acts are in response to the Boston Tea Party. So the colonists dumped the tea, and the Brits put the taxes. They put the acts onto them. So this is after the Intolerable Acts. Okay.
Yeah.
So our first Continental Congress. This is 1774, I believe. So the first Continental Congress, the goals were to write the American grievances and develop a strategy for addressing them. And it was also to make a position on the relation between America and the Crown. There are no calls for independence at this meeting. No one is throwing around the I word yet. So this is just how do we reform our position with the British? How do we make ourselves have better standing? So the start of the American War is the shot heard around the world, as it's called. It is the Battle of Lexington and Concord. You really don't need to know the specific battles like the Battle of Saratoga or Battle of Yorktown. You don't really need to know these. What you need to know is that at the Battle of Lexington and Concord, it is the Minutemen and the Patriots who start the fighting. So the Minutemen were, as the name says, they were to be called on. They were militiamen to be called on in a minute. Get ready for battle. So, I mean, you guys know Paul Revere's famous ride, right? So that is what is infamously known as the start of the American War. But it's also another thing that's highly propagandized and that kind of thing. So as of now, the Continental Army does not exist. This is mainly just untrained militiamen running around with guns, shooting at random things, and they're completely disorganized, and they really don't have it together. The British, on the other hand, have their very well-trained army, their well-standing army, who fires in these nice little rows, and they fire very nicely. They're a very effective force, but once the Continental Army gets together, it becomes a formidable force. So at the Battle of Lexington and Concord, the Redcoats and the Loyalists so you can think of the war right now as between the Minutemen and the Patriots versus the Redcoats and the Loyalists. So the Loyalists also wanted to keep their slaves as well, and slaves fought on the British side of the Civil War, or not the Civil War, the American War mainly, because the British said, if you fight with us, you will be a free man. So a lot of slaves took it up with the British because in exchange for their service, they were granted freedom. So the Second Continental Congress, which is, I believe, 1776, I could be wrong, or it might be 75, is the formation of the Continental Army under George Washington. So at this sort of Continental Congress, there's some mentions of independence, but that's not what they want yet. So they first send what is called the olive branch petition to the crown. They say, hey, I know we've been fighting for a while and we've been doing these kind of things, but this is our last chance. We're going to offer you peace. We're going to live under each other. Let's not escalate this to a war. The British deny this. King George III sees this as like an insult to him, and he completely outright denies it. So the Declaration of Independence comes next. What you should know about the Declaration of Independence is sort of the Enlightenment ideals in it. So we have all men are created equal, which is sort of the Enlightenment ideal Thomas Jefferson uses, and sort of the language in it. It's basically one long hate letter to the British government explaining why they're leaving. It's like a big breakup text if you think of it that way. Yeah. So Thomas Paine writes Common Sense. Thomas Paine is a very good writer. I think he's actually British, but Common Sense is a very pro-American book. It is, I think, maybe not recently, but it is the most printed and distributed book in American history to the most percent of people. So every bar, every church, every municipal government had a copy of Common Sense. The language of Common Sense was what I mentioned before. How can an island rule a continent? How are we allowing ourselves to be deprived of our nature by the British government? What we'll read in the DBQ actually is one of Thomas Paine's thing. He says, Britain, with an army to enforce her tyranny, has declared that she has a right not only to tax us, but to bind us in whatever case she deems necessary. So the language in this is very strong. It's a very strong language, and it's a big emotional appeal to the colonists to fight for independence. Thomas Paine does call for independence from the British. So the Battle of Yorktown, it is the last battle of the American War of Independence. The Treaty of Paris is signed in Paris. There are a lot of Treaty of Parises, so don't feel too stressed about sort of memorizing like what Treaty of Paris it is. Just know what came out of it. So the big thing to come out of the Treaty of Paris is that the colonists are free. Britain maintains Canada. Pretty sure the Americans have to pay some debt to the British. Also, the Franco-American alliance starts to come into fold. So the French does play a big part in the American War for Independence, and the French and Americans kind of become best buds for a little bit until the XYZ affair. Yeah. 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 The battles of the war aren't important. You just have to know the war started and the war ended.
Yorktown's the end. Because I was gonna say like King George, we were just hearing like denied everything. Now.
Yeah, he was. Just know King George was very, very incompetent, and he was very like, I don't know, like stubborn, like very rugged. Like we didn't talk about Benedict Arnold because like it honestly like those specific things won't really come up. And if they do come up, you know the general trends of the war, and you know like what, like you just need to know how to logic the questions out rather than do anything else. Yeah, Kyle?
Was it denied, like, why would he not want peace? Were they also asking for, like,
He just saw it as an insult. Like it would basically be like a slave asking his master, like, in exchange for me not beating you up right now because I'm way stronger than you, you should let me go free. Like he saw it as an insult. Like why is my colonies, why is my pets telling me what to do? That's what he really saw it as. So the Battle of Yorktown, Moscow, you know the song the Yankee song?
Yeah.
Yeah. So that song is supposedly sung by the Americans as they walk Cornwallis out of the Battle of Yorktown. They beat the drums, they sing that song, and it is a complete embarrassment for the British. So after the Battle of Yorktown, they're unable to amass a really big army, and the Brits kind of settle. They allow the Americans to seek independence. Yeah. So a big thing for the British is they were unsuccessful in the war because they are so far away from the Americas, right? Supply line issues, that kind of thing really do come into play, and they can't support an army from thousands of miles away. That rhymes. Articles of Confederation. So the Articles of Confederation are the first national constitution. The Article of Confederations are seen as ineffective. They don't work. It is basically a figurehead. They cannot enforce taxes. The government they created cannot enforce taxes. They cannot trade. There's no branches of government. It's completely ineffective. So basically, the Articles of Confederation sort of prop up these state governments that have been running for so long. So the Virginia is basically a semi-autonomous figure. So Shays' Rebellion is an example of the ineffectiveness of the Articles of Confederation. It demonstrates the weakness of the federal government due to the fact that Shay has his little revolt, and the government is unable to put it down. So the state governments must do it on their own. The new Constitution, or the first Constitution in the United States, is Alexander Hamilton. He's really the archetype of it, along with Thomas Jefferson. You see a lot more Enlightenment language, and we get to sort of the Bill of Rights we'll talk about further on. Just know that they're sort of making a stronger federal government than there once was under the Articles of Confederation. They basically fixed the Articles of Confederation where it lacked. So the New Jersey and Virginia plan, you should know these two by name. So these are two different forms of government for the sort of bicameral legislature that will show up. The New Jersey plan, they wanted equal representation by means of states. So the states would each have 2 representation no matter what. The Virginia plan wanted representation based on population. Thank you for finishing my sentences. So that allows Virginia to get like 13 representatives, while Rhode Island can only get 1 or 2 or something like that. The New Jersey plan also is a bicameral legislature, while the Virginia plan is a unicameral. It's just the one body. So bicameral is it's the House of Representatives and the Senate. So under the Virginia plan, it would only be the Senate. For the bicameral, which we get from the Jersey plan, we have what we have nowadays, which is Congress being Senate and the House. So that's really what the takeaways you should know. The Great Compromise comes out of fact of this. It fixes sort of the Virginia plan, the New Jersey plan. It takes half from each of them. So the government we have now is the bicameral legislature. We have the House and we have the Senate, and also representation by population. So we have half the New Jersey plan, half the Virginia plan. So the 3/5 compromise as well means that for population, that a slave is worth 3/5 of a person as a colonist. So this was passed by the North to make sure the South did not have too much control in the government. A lot of people think this was passed by the North. It's a very common misconception. The South, the North were really being the ones racist here, but they were doing it to preserve their sort of power in the government.
So if you were to compare populations and the slaves were a whole person, the South would put them on.
Yeah. I'm pretty sure there's, I think, 1 year in American history where the slave population increases like tenfold more than the actual colonist population increases. So what you would have is like actual states, like I think South Carolina and I think Georgia were actually more populated by slaves than they were more populated by.
The deep South, like Georgia,
Yeah.
Alabama, there were many more slaves than freedom.
Yeah.
But yeah, like what you just said is exactly correct. Like the 3/5 compromise sounds superficially racist because you're saying that a human being is only worth 3/5 of a human being when you talk about slaves. But the North was adamant about that, not because they were racist, but to cut the legs out of the southern states and were about to use all of their slaves to get more representatives, not to vote. right? But to get more representatives. It's also the only mention in the Constitution of slavery kind of indirectly. So like the question of is slavery ever addressed in the Constitution? The word does not appear there, but the Three-Fifths Compromise implies that the North was consenting to the Southern slaves.
So yeah, Jim.
So what brought up the Shays Rebellion?
So Shays Rebellion, it's just I'm pretty sure that they didn't like the governor of whatever. I think it was might have been Virginia. I want to say. Don't quote me on that. It's not really that too important. But basically, it's just he wanted to invade some land that were controlled by the Native Americans. His governor said, "No, you cannot do that," and he did it anyway. He raised a little bit of an army, and the state had to put him down. So that's basically the main takeaway. So the Federalists and the Federalist Papers. So the Federalists are pro-Constitution. That's really what you should know. The Federalist Papers are papers written by Alexander Hamilton in immense support for the Constitution. The Federalists down the road are the ones who support a strong federal government. So make sure you don't get those confused with each other. So the Bill of Rights and the Washington Presidency. So Washington is the first president of the United States, as many of you know. He's voted unanimously. The Bill of Rights, I mean, honestly, you probably should just know the Bill of Rights just by being an American citizen. The Bill of Rights are really where we get that like strong Enlightenment speech in it, especially the First Amendment, where freedom of religion and freedom of press and those things kind of take place. Yeah, like it's very Enlightenment speeches. So if you get an LEQ on the Bill of Rights, like to what extent is the Bill of Rights an example of an Enlightenment document, you might want to throw some of those phrases, some of those ideas in there. I don't know if I did mention, the Enlightenment is a time of it's sort of like a quasi-Renaissance thing where people are becoming like morally more tolerant. There is a vast innovation of people. Ideas are becoming more commonly expressed. And republicanism is becoming one of the triumphant more government systems. Yeah, JD? Yeah, there's some element of romanticism, but I don't think of it in the terms of like art romanticism, obviously. Is your question? So, President of the United States, Washington. So during his presidency, there's the creation of the National Bank. The purpose of the National Bank is to regulate and strengthen the economy. The National Bank is one of Hamilton's little pet projects, and he is the main harbinger of the sort of economy that will grow out of the Americas. George Washington also proclaims neutrality. The French Revolution happens, and the French come back to their friends and the Americans and say, "Hey, can you maybe help us out?" And Washington says, "No, we are staying neutral. We're not getting involved in your affairs." The French get kind of mad, and they say, "What? We just helped you." And they're like, "Nope, not my problem." So these Federalists are different. These Federalists want a strong federal government. So don't get them confused with pro-Constitution or not. These support a strong federal government. So we kind of get an element of state and federal government here, where the Federalists want the federal government to triumph the state. Democratic Republicans, another Enlightenment idea that is also in the French Revolution form. This basically just Jeffersonian supporters. So people who supported Thomas Jefferson were considered Democratic Republicans. It's also their ideals about representation and about government also come into place, like a republic and those kind of things. The Whiskey Rebellion is considered one of the low points of George Washington's presidency. It is a Pennsylvania farmers. They resisted attacks on whiskey. And this is an example of really class tensions between the poor Western farmers, not coastal, the poor inland farmers versus the wealthy elite coastal people. So this is sort of a thing. There's going to be an increased tension between the wealthy people on the coast and the poor people in America. It's something it starts to conflict with one another. So the end result of the Whiskey Rebellion, Washington puts it down with an army, and they are basically, I think 3 are executed. Jay's Treaty is one of the high points of Washington's presidency. It prevents a war with Great Britain over some territory in the north of Maine and that kind of area. Not Maine, like Vermont, New Hampshire. Yeah, might be. Just know that Jay is a person. Um, he is the one who actually officiates the treaty under the direction of Washington. So this is where we see a federal power as well. The Constitution and the executive branch of government allows the president, to negotiate treaties with other countries, negotiate things such as the Jay Treaty. I think it's one of the presidents down the line who will use that justification for things that they should not really be used for, but we'll get to that eventually. So Pinckney's Treaty is also a high of George Washington's presidency. It is basically a masterful diplomacy in which he negotiates the treaty or the borders between Spain and the U.S., the Florida region and the Mexican region. So this is our last slide of the unit. So Republican motherhood. This will most likely come up on your test. So Republican motherhood is the importance of an education founded by the mothers. So mothers ought to give their children, their men, their sons especially, a good education, and they must be child rearers. Their place is in the home, and that's where they should raise their kids and teach proper moral values. John Adams' presidency, or Washington's farewell address, also comes up a lot. He basically says, don't have political parties because you'll have tensions, and stay out of European affairs. That doesn't come true, and you might get like a LEQ or a question like that where it says, evaluate and analyze the extent to which Washington's word in his farewell address are actually followed or addressed. The answer is they are not. The U.S. gets involved with foreign nations, and they get involved with political parties. John Adams, he is a Federalist, so he is the pro sort of strong government person that we see. Jefferson, on the other side, is a states' rights person. He is one of those Republicans, Democratic Republicans. So John Adams' presidency is basically summed up. He doesn't really do anything. He kind of sits back. He lets his cabinet do whatever they want. So Alexander Hamilton takes charge. He keeps the National Bank going. He really takes the wheel with that. And then the XYZ affair is probably what John Adams is most known for. So the XYZ affair is where French officials, over the impressment of U.S. soldiers, a couple of delegates from America go to France to negotiate how to get these sailors out of French custody. The French say, I'll let them out if you give me a lot of money. And so sort of the newspaper that comes out of this is French delegates try to bribe Americans and they deny. So this is basically very, very close to a war. And this sort of gets mangled up, and the outcome is that the people of America now hate the French instead of loving them as they did before. They now hate the French, and this is the quasi-war that starts to come up. So the quasi-war is just a term used to describe the naval battles between the Americans and the French that happened. It's like skirmishes, like little fights. Like they weren't part of a war, but they happened to fight each other sometimes. Yeah. It's some American sailors were in custody in France, and the American delegates went to France to get them out, and the French demanded a bribe. The Americans said, no, thank you. And then the newspapers in America, it's called the XYZ affair because the names of the delegates on the bribe are changed to X, Y, and Z. So it's like X, Y, and Z demanded a bribe from me or something like that. So the Alien Sedition Acts are the low point of his presidency. These acts are basically that the president may expel foreigners as he pleases, and he can jail newspapers and journalists who say like bad things about the president, who say seditious things. They were actually they were used frequently, or not recently, with the January 6th insurrection. Nullification is a states' rights thing used by Thomas Jefferson. Nullification is the sort of states' rights. So if federal law passes, if Congress passes a law, the states reserve the right to nullify the law. They can say in their own sort of body, we're not going to follow that law. So this occurs with one of the laws that will come up with it's one of the acts that John Adams passes, And Thomas Jefferson basically says, no, I'm not going to follow that law. And so we get the tension there. So you should know that there's an increasing tension between states' rights and federal government. So congratulations, that is Unit 3 done.
Three more units.
So we're going to do some review questions, and then we're going to move to DBQ. Okay?
How long do you think that's gonna take?
What time is it?
It's 3:40 now.
We'll be done at like 4:50, 4:30 maybe.
Jesus.
That's not bad.
Not bad. No.
Oh no, it's no. I'd say like 4:15 then, definitely. 4:15 or so. So here's the review questions. So, all right, according to the theory of virtual representation, what was the theory of virtual representation?
It's like Parliament represented on the continent colonies.
Yeah, so Parliament represents the colonists who don't have voting power in the actual Parliament. The Stamp Act of Congress in 1765 was historically significant in the fact that it what? Yeah, Carter.
Tax on anything that was like legal, anything that was like a sort of document, legal document, anything.
And it marked the first step of what?
I guess revolt.
Yeah, road to revolution is the phrase that's commonly used. Historians often cite Shays' Rebellion as a significant event in U.S. history because it blank. What did it do, Jimmy?
Didn't it prove the federal government was weak?
Yeah, the Articles of a Confederation were weak and they were insufficient. The Albany Plan of Union failed because nobody showed up, right? None of the actual delegates were there, and they also did not want to have a strong federal power. They did not want to have a body that could tax them all federally. They liked the right to tax themselves. All right, so let me see if I can get one more question here. George Washington established the principle of executive privilege in a dispute with Congress over the Alien and Sedition Acts, the legality of political parties, the Jay Treaty, or the Whiskey Rebellion. Yeah. George Washington established the principle of executive privilege in a dispute with Congress over the Alien Sedition Acts, the legality of political parties, the Jay Treaty, or the Whiskey Rebellion. The Jay Treaty. It's the Jay Treaty. Great Britain.
Yeah, that's fine. Wait, what was it?
The Jay Treaty. I would just know that he said don't have political parties and to keep out of European politics. All right, let's move to the DBQ. So I have DBQs up here for all of you. So these DBQs we're gonna go over. You do not need your laptops for this. So if they would help you focus.
Torres.
Yeah. I will grade these for accuracy.
We're writing one?
Yeah, not now.
Oh, I was gonna say,
You do it on your own.
the roots are out. It's just.
No, we're not leaving. Only some people are leaving. If you took honors last year, please stick around for this. You need it.
Yeah, well, it's a good thing that everyone's
When was it?
It was on the Dutch conversation.
Steve?
Yeah, Steve.
I'm not going to London, it's no use to you.
I'm coming, London.
Wow, you really got the whole room going.
Everyone's leaving?
No, only the losers are leaving.
I think I'm better at essays than papers. I don't think so.
Okay, so yeah. So we're going to go over how to analyze documents as well as how to how to do a DBQ. So let me just try to AirPlay my my iPad. Let me figure out how to do that. And so Nate, you got one, right? I just did not call you. I didn't call you. That's a lie. Yeah. So no, you don't have to do it. Like, yeah, no, we're gonna go through it.
Oh.
We're gonna review. No, but when we're done here, you can write them, and I will grade them for you. So I will give you a score out of 7 based on the rubric, because Bell won't, so I will. Let me see. AirPlay.
I have a question.
Yeah.
Is it possible to write like a really good DBQ with like absolutely no?
Yeah, I can know nothing and write a 7 DBQ. I mean, you have to know outside information. You technically need outside information, but like you technically.
Supposed to be insulted? No, not at all. But like they can't remember something.
I wasn't in that class.
Like you ask a question.
How do I do?
In theory, there's only 2 points on the rubric that require outside information. Yeah, exactly. So like the contextualization, somebody just said, and then the outside information, which would mean that if you know nothing, just by using the documents, you can score 5 out of 7.
Does anyone have a
That presumes you know how to write.
UBSC iPad charger per chance, so I can plug it into the Zoom for the video? Do you have one of those?
Did you try? Did you try what's that?
It's not, only it's an iPad charger.
I took it for like 15 minutes.
Okay. What? If you can give it to me whenever you want. I'll do it. The lectures? I honestly don't know when else. I have baseball. Okay.
I was joking. No. What I jokingly said in a happy, friendly manner. See, they're trying to shut me up too.
You should see a cardiologist.
No.
Yeah.
What I said was, are you undergoing diabetes? As I look at like
No
your
one
small
said
like
that.
dragon
Mr.
board of
Tedeschi.
lollipops.
What? Mr. Tedeschi. I make the big return at JSA next week. 12 right now. We've all been hanging out.
I'm not towards everyone.
All right, let's get her started. Yeah. Lynch, could you shut the door? 2015. All right, so put in the wrong code. 1 second. So first, what we're going to do, we're going to first discuss the DBQ. So the DBQ is a document-based question, as the name says. It is a 7-document sort of essay. So you're going to have to use all these documents in one cohesive essay. So you're going to have to pull from each of the documents, pull out some data, pull out whatever, and make it a nice essay where you argue something. So let's first go over the rubric. So this is what's in front of you. We're first going to go over the rubric. So the rubric says there are 7 points. I don't know why this is doing this. Oh, there we go. You guys can see that well, right? Yeah. So the first point is the contextualization point. So there's 7 points. The DBQ is more of a skill than it is an actual writing form. If you can do it based on the rubric, you're going to get the highest grade that you should get. You're going to get a very good grade. Kind of cheese the system with it, but sort of. So for contextualization, you're going to want to contextualize your argument by offering a broad historical sort of context. So one thing is, the other point is outside information. Your contextualization and outside information cannot be the same. So the way you should do contextualization is a paragraph at the beginning of your essay. This paragraph should describe the sort of climate, describe the time of whenever you're your thing is. So for our prompt, evaluate the extent of change in ideas about American independence from 1763 to 1783. What are some things I might bring up to sort of lay the scene, set the scene of my prompt?
Maybe
Marcus?
like the Declaration of Independence.
That could be one thing, yeah. What else?
How the colonists felt that they weren't being represented.
So we might bring up sort of the acts against the colonists by the British. We might bring up the Boston Tea Party, the intolerable acts, things such as that. So then that's a pretty easy point, you know. So let's make sure we get that, because that's one of the points you can definitely get, and it's not too difficult. So the thesis and the claim point. Your thesis has to be solid. It has to be a strong claim. You cannot have a sort of in between, like maybe yes, maybe no. No. I recommend you take a solid stance, really a yes or no. So for this prompt, I would say evaluate the extent of change. A good thesis would be something along the lines of the ideas in American independence completely changed from just reform to independence based on the Declaration of Independence. And then when we get to the documents, we'll talk about that as well. But that solid sort of ABC thesis is what we like. So that's sort of like it's true because A, B, C. That sort of form of thesis is something you kind of want, okay? You want a clear and defendable thesis, all right? You don't have to write 5 paragraphs, but I would say 3 claims is something that's good. So either 2 or 3 claims. Yeah.
I was gonna say, well, you should have to.
Yeah. So the DBQ, it's an hour. So, or I think I'm pretty sure it's an hour. It's an hour.
It's an hour to include the reading time.
Yeah. So you have an hour to read all these documents and then write an essay. So it's a lot more important to get the content on the piece of paper, start reading, start writing, that kind of thing, than it is important to actually write a really good essay. That's why I said, like, it's not about writing an essay, it's about writing the DBQ. It's about the skill rather than it is about writing a very good essay. So a thesis point is one you should always be getting as well. So when we get down to our actual documents, for the documents, you must describe 3 of them. So you don't have to really use all of the documents for the describes. You have to use at least 6 of the 7 documents, okay? So if there's one document out of these 7 you do not like, you don't have to use it. What I recommend is use all the documents, because why not, you know? So what could happen is if I have doc 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, I only need to describe 3. So let's say I try to describe all of them. So describing is something like, for document 1, right? We look at the tea kettle. Describing the document would say, in document, or not, don't say in document 1. Say the tea kettle says America liberty restored. Thus, this is a British manufacturer making goods for the Americas. So that is the describes. So we get that. And then our supports is how it would support our argument. So if I was talking about trade in the Americas, I could support my argument with this document by saying something along the lines of the fact that the British are making goods for the Americas and capitalizing off of their vow for independence shows how American sentiment was increasingly anti-British, because this is obviously an anti-British sentiment and a slogan. So that's how that would support my argument. And then I need to explain why or how this point of view of the document, this purpose, this historical situation, is relevant to the argument. So my sort of audience here, my sort of point of view is that they can capitalize off of the Americas. The point of view is the audience are the consumers. So 3 things you really should be looking for in every single document you analyze. It's A, who is the writer? Okay. What's some bias they may have? What's their position? Are they in a position of power? Are they a church member? Are they a priest? Something like that. Any potential biases there? Why are they writing this? And then the last question is, how can I support my argument with this document? So those are sort of the three questions you should really be asking yourself as you go through these documents. And remember, you only have to do these sort of things for 6 of them. So let's say I miss the supports here, but I support all of these. So I get that point there. And let's say I try to describe all of them, but I miss on Doc 4, Doc 5, Doc 6, but I get 3 of them. I still get that point because I only need to describe at least 3 of them. So for this one, I need to do 3. For this one, it's 6. Okay? So let's say again, I only explain for 3 of them. I still get that explains point. So what I recommend is you try to explain for all of them. If they're not necessarily successful, you might still get the point somewhere else. Yeah.
So it's okay to like say on Doc 5 I explained it wrong. It's okay and I can still get the point if I were to have the other 6.
Yeah. So you can. So if you describe 5, as long as you describe it well and 3 others of them, you're still getting that point.
Okay.
Like this, like this is a good rubric, and it's the one that I used last year with you too. It's misleading in terms of the names a little bit. So like the way you just use the word explains is not what the rubric means by explains. It's confusing because the way you used explains is actually describes. So the explains there is not explains the document. It explains some way of interpreting the document other than what it literally says. So like explain how, because the person who wrote this was an Anglican minister, matters to how you interpret the document.
So is it pretty much rewriting it just like in my sense? Like I'm pretty much explaining the way I think that.
The describes point is literally summarizing the document, telling the reader what does the document mean.
Yeah.
The supports point is telling the reader how what you just described relates to your argument, and the explains point is how does the bias, the point of view of the author or the medium of the document, how does it how does that work into your analysis of the document?
Okay.
So don't confuse explains and describes. Since like we use those words the same way,
Yeah.
Do you have one?
they're actually talking
Do you
about
have one?
different things. If anybody wants, by the way, I have this, which is like the same rubric, but it's got different explanations. So like if you're confused by it, if you want.
Torres?
So like, for this one, let's say I was saying that the change of like American independence became more widespread, and I said that the fact that it was made in England, that's who it was made in, would that be an explains point?
So you could say like the sort of complexity or like the nuance of it, or like on a greater scale, that would be the explains point. So if you could wind that in there.
The fact that it was made in England and that there was American liberation.
Yeah. So you would be really describing there. You'd be describing the audience, right? So the audience is the consumers, which are the Americans, made by the British goods. So that would be my explains point right
So,
there.
all right. So like, wait, what's the difference between like describe and support?
Yeah.
Like,
So describes is just a summary of the document.
so how do I support without describing?
So support, like describing is just, okay, what is this? This is a tea kettle that says American liberty restored. That's describing. Supporting is, okay, how do I make this support my argument? This shows that American Revolution and independence was becoming more widespread over the years because it's a British good with anti-American sentiment or something like that. Like that would be your supports. Think of describes as literally a summary of the document, and then supports is you relating that document to your overall argument.
So like, if there was like a doc that I didn't describe, how would I use like how would I use that to support without the?
Usually, like,
It's weird. Like, sorry to keep interrupting.
Yeah, no.
I actually like these reviews. This is actually like I've been playing with it for a few seconds. It's actually really good to do. So like like it's weird to use a document to support without describing it, which is why like when I write one, I almost always describe it just because it doesn't make sense to me not to do it. So
Like,
you're right. But if you're short on time, or if you just don't feel like it for some reason, like you don't have to reference the document to get the support point. Like for example, like there's two documents here. One is Samuel Adams, one is Thomas Paine. So you could say both Thomas Paine and Samuel Adams were in support of separation. I haven't mentioned anything about the document content itself. All I'm doing is saying how it relates to my personal argument.
And then describe it to be like in like a document speaking about very.
So the best way to do describes, if you have unlimited amount of time, in my opinion, is to quote the document and then tell the reader what the quote you just made means. So you have to be kind of selective of that, which is why when I go through these, like I usually like underline like phrases that I know I can quote quickly in the document. So like in document 3, like I underline all men have a right to remain in the state of nature as long as they please, because I would have quoted Samuel Adams in saying that to the point that I think I would have made. But then so after you quote, you have to tell the reader what the quote means. It just takes more time, but it makes a better essay too.
And then if I were to tie in like what the quote means with how it supports my argument, that'd be both describe and support. Like.
So our last 2 points here, the use one piece of specific historical evidence. This is our outside information or something like that. So outside information is information you did not mention in your contextualization, and it's also information not mentioned in the documents. So one piece of outside information I might use is the line, all men are created equal, if I'm supporting the Samuel Adams argument. That is direct outside information from the Declaration of Independence. If I didn't mention that in my contextualization, that is the point.
You have to be careful, by the way, that whatever you use as outside evidence, one, it was not used as contextualization, because you can't earn double duty for it. So, like, you can't put the same outside information in the context and as your outside information point. They won't give it to you. The other thing is that you can't get the outside evidence point if it's given to you in the document. That would make it not outside evidence. So like if you're outside evidence, and I might have actually made this mistake in my head as I was just doing it, I just caught myself. Like as I read through it, I made a note to myself where I was going to put the outside evidence, and where I was going to do it, I think I wouldn't do it now because I was going to talk about the taxes. And I think the teapot, because it says no Stamp Act on it, means that I probably can't earn the outside evidence for talking about the Stamp Act. Even though it doesn't really say anything about the Stamp Act in document 1, it just says no Stamp Act. Like I wouldn't want to touch that with like a 10-foot pole because the reader might say Stamp Act was mentioned in the DBQ, no outside evidence for Stamp Act.
Contextualization. That if you mention Stamp Act,
It can't be in the DBQ. I mean, you could put it in the paragraph, but like if all you wrote points for it. Yeah.
So our last point is the complexity point. It's also called the unicorn point. Only 1% of students who take the AP exam will get this point. So it's not a point you should stress about, but it's a point you should not be really trying to get. Well, you can try to get it. There's certain ways, but if you're writing a good essay, you're going to get the point. And it's really not something you should strive to get because it comes along with good writing and it comes along with that sort of writing fatigue. So the sort of things you can do to sort of gain the unicorn point or the complexity point is nuance or continuity and change over time. So if I say like in my thesis, usually you want to do the complexity in your thesis. It helps a lot for you to build your argument around it. It helps, it's way easier to do. So if I said the ideas of American independence changed from the years 1763 to 1783 through the Declaration of Independence through trade, but it was the same through the state governments. That would be a complex sort of thesis because I have my support and I also have my although statement. I have my contrary report. So that is the DBQ rubric. And now we are going to look at the actual documents. Yeah.
In the case that we were doing DBQ where we knew absolutely nothing, what do you think is the best place to like work with that and try to like reason with it, I guess?
You gotta read the document.
Yeah.
And
We'll talk about it specifically when we get to the actual when we get to the documents, but there's a certain way to do it, you know. So I mean, I don't have the AirPlay anymore, which is a little unfortunate. Let me try to figure out how to share this. Does anyone have one of those USB-C chargers that Jusik just lent me, but he left?
Are you sure that's not a USB-C charger then?
Yeah, but it wouldn't plug into my iPad. No, it
There's
needs,
two chargers down there. One is like, I could be wrong.
there's this one, right?
There's one that's a USB-C and then there's one that's a USB mini.
The MacBook, right? The MacBook
The one you're not holding,
is this.
is that not? Oh, that's a regular USB?
Yeah.
Oh, never mind. I thought I had, what is that on next to the lamp? I mean, I definitely have one here somewhere.
It's just a USB.
in my car, I have.
No. I have one in my car as well, but yeah, because the Jeeps are like that. But all right, I'm gonna try via AirPlay, but if that's unsuccessful, we're just gonna keep moving, and the people who are on the video later will just have to suffer.
Where's the record?
Zoom.
No, where's the camera?
There's no camera. It's just AirPlay. They just listen to my voice.
But is it recording?
Yeah.
What's recording, your laptop?
Yeah. Yeah, I don't know. I'm honestly, we're a little not successful. I'm just gonna have them follow along with it online, and we'll see if that works. APUSH doc 2 on independence. All right, so let's look at doc 1. We're gonna look at the first couple docs together, and then we're gonna start doing it on our own. So for doc 1, oh, this is not what I want.
Thank you.
I'll see you later.
My brain is still straight.
Yeah, well, this, if you think about it, we'd be halfway through the test right now. If you were doing work this entire time, you'd be halfway through the test.
Great.
Wait, how long is the entire
It
time?
also wouldn't be at the end of a full
It's
school day.
2:45.
And I was tired to begin with, so.
And they give you a break. You probably just need a 5-minute break to refresh yourself.
Nice little back
Wait,
to
do we
back
get-
SAT APUSH test. You gotta love it.
Do we get breaks?
I think so, like midway maybe, or
Oh, do you have the SAT the day after?
Yeah.
you do?
Dude, no, I'm taking the ACT this week too.
Oh,
Yeah,
I got that too.
and Dr. Esker is giving us an exam.
Yeah, you realize it's the day after finals, right?
The period we come back.
The day after finals.
Well, no, I'm signed up for that, but if I do good, then I'm just not gonna take it.
Okay, so doc 1. So doc 1, as we mentioned, right, it's a T-part. So what I like to do first is when I examine documents, I like to first look at who it's from. Who's my source?
It's an institution.
No. Who's my source here? So my source,
The teapot.
so it's a teapot, right? So it's made in England, right? And they give me the years. And I see no Stamp Act, and I also see America Liberty Restored. So what kind of, like, I don't know, what kind of feeling are we getting from this teapot? Yeah, Torres?
Pro-America.
Pro-America, right? So we're kind of getting a pro-America sort of feeling, right? Sort of feeling. So who might my audience be? Who might be this teapot for?
The colonists?
The colonists, right? And if this is made in Britain, right? What does that mean? How are they getting it to America?
By trading.
Trade, right? So our audience is going to be the colonists. That's not good handling.
How did you know this was for America? Are you just reasoning that through, or?
He's
The,
just smart like that.
The summary on the scoring guidelines says it's for America.
Wait, what do you mean?
So this is an example of trading commerce as well, right? As Moscow mentioned, we get that commerce sort of thing. As well as this is a British manufacturer capitalizing on the American sort of situation. So the Americans are our audience, and they are also seen as consumers in the eyes of the manufacturer. So that document could help us with our sort of reasoning with the British and that kind of thing, right? So that's the way you kind of have to look at these documents. First, who's it from? What's any bias there? Those were our questions, right? What was our next question?
Who's the audience?
Who's the audience, right? And then what's the last question?
Why or what are they trying to say?
Like, how does it support my argument? You know? So who's the audience?
The colonists.
And how might this support your argument? Well, yeah.
It kind of demonstrates like the British trying to capitalize on the Americans trying to do some like kind of like I don't know.
Yeah.
do the best.
So we see a big center on trade and that kind of manufacturing business. So if we go to document 2, we have the Virginia House of Bourgeois. I don't know how to say that. Burgesses. And what the, okay. And it's the Virginia Resolves. So what did I go over what the House of Burgesses was?
The House of Bordeaux,
Burgesses. Apparently.
What did you say before?
Yeah, what is it?
It's actually really important to how I did it, because that was my POV for that document.
Who is it?
The Virginia legislative body.
Yeah, but it's also pre-American
Pre-American
Revolution,
government,
and
so-
it's very, very democratic.
Oh, wait, wasn't the Virginia one? It was the Virginia and then the New Jersey thing?
No, you're thinking about compromises. The Virginia House of Burgesses is a colonial representatives. So, I mean, it's like a pre-revolution example of democracy at work in the state of Virginia. In other words, like it's evidence that there was a tradition of representative democracy alive in the colonies, or at least in Virginia, in 1769.
So the Virginia Resolves, right? So let's read through this document together, right? Let's do it together. This is our first Word document. And it is the opinion of this committee, the House of Burgesses, that the sole right of imposing taxes on the inhabitants of His Majesty's colony and Dominion of Virginia is now and ever hath been legally and constitutionally vested in the House of Burgesses, lawfully convened according to the ancient and established practice, with the consent of the Council of His Majesty, the King of Britain, or his governor, for the time being. So what does that sentence say, basically? What's the sort of summary of that sentence?
That
Yeah,
it's
Marcus.
justified from the British government to tax the colony.
Mm-hmm. So it's saying that their body has legitimacy, right? So where does the legitimacy come from according to the sentence?
The king.
The king, right? It is according to the covenant of the established practice, right? So what are some other things we might pull out of that, right? We might see that the sole right of imposing taxes on the inhabitants of the state, right, is the power of the colony. So we have some resistance to British taxes from the state government of Virginia, right? So the GB taxes versus the House of Burgesses.
So they're basically saying that only the Virginia House has the right to tax.
Yeah. So this is right. Remember what we talked about, right? The colonies they enjoyed their right to self-autonomy, right? They enjoyed their right to tax themselves and legislate themselves. And so when Big Brother, the British government, comes in, they weren't too fond of that. So let's go to the next one. It is the opinion of this committee that it is undoubted privilege of the inhabitants of the colony to petition their sovereign for the redress of grievances, and that it is lawful and expedient to procure the concurrence of His Majesty's other colonies in dutiful addresses, praying the royal interposition in favor of the violated rights of America. What's a big thing to pull out right there? Violated rights of America. Right. So we both have sort of a national identity, right? We have a national ID, as well as they saw their rights is being violated, right? So that is a big point of view we could pull out there. So when we talked about before, when we talked about point of view and explains, this is the point of view of the House of Burgesses that their rights are being violated, right? So as we keep reading, right, is the opinion of this committee that a humble, dutiful, and loyal address be presented to His Majesty to assure him of. It's really just get it to him. So there's part of these documents where it's kind of fluffy, where there's not like a lot of being spoken. And honestly, the way I do my DBQ, as soon as I get the overall vibe from the document and I get the part I want to pull out, I move on to the next document. So right here, what I'm going to pull out is the violated rights of America as my POV. And I'm also going to pull out the sort of right to impose taxes because I know I can include some outside information there. You know?
That was the taxes I had circled with my outside information. Like a good way of getting like the outside evidence point is to expand on something in the document that's referenced but not explained that you know about.
Would that
Like
be
if
the
you know
fact
about
that?
the taxes that were actually passed, like against the colonists, like I would say like the right of imposing taxes, and I would stop there, and then I would tell the reader about like I would list out like the taxes and the dates and which like and that would be my outside evidence.
So Moscow, what we just discussed, right? We saw they talked about the violated rights of America. So we talked about point of view here. If the person writing this is writing down the rights, the violated rights of America, what might be their point of view on sort of Britain overlordship in America?
He might believe that the rights of America have been violated.
Being violated, right? So this could be our explains right here with the point of view. And this is what I would recommend sort of looking at it. We started talking about like how documents kind of get fluffy. Like we didn't really look at this whole paragraph down here. Not saying you really should, but as soon as I got something where I knew I could pull it out with the violated rights of America, as well as the sole right of imposing taxes up here, I knew, okay, it's time to move on to this document because I got what I need. You know, I pulled out my 2 quotes or so, and I have my outside evidence maybe that I want to go with. Yeah.
Instead of like using a quote, can I just say like the Virginia House?
Yeah, you can paraphrase, but honestly, if it's something like this where they literally say violated rights of America, I do recommend that you really quote that.
Like sorry again.
Yeah, no.
But like just my own like thinking process when I'm doing these things, I'm also looking for pairings of the documents. And a clever way of pairing documents is to line up and juxtapose similar and meaningful quotes from them. So like what I pulled from this was the word America, violated rights of America. And then I was gonna put that with where it says in document 4 in 1775, where it refers to the welfare of our country. And I would have made some kind of argument that like those like that language is evidence of a sense of national identity, even before 1776 and as early as 1769. But like to do that with quotes is really effective, right? Like to say like in 1769, the House of Burgesses were already referring to themselves as America, and in 1775, Quakers are referring to the colonies as our country, right? Like quoting just those 2 words is good. Yeah.
Yeah, and so as we keep moving on here, a big thing also is important to keep in mind dates, right? So our prompt is telling us between a certain years. So it's telling us between 1763 to 1783. So we want to keep in mind, right, not sort of what's happening at the time, but what is this before? So this is before the Boston Tea Party, the Boston Massacre. This is before the Declaration of Independence. While some of these docs, especially from the 80s, is something after all this has happened. So these document right now, Doc 2 and Doc 1, have been prior to any major calls for independence or calls of national identity or something like that.
The another like good trick for that is that when they give you dates like this, like those are not random rounded off dates. Like they could have said 1760 to 1780, but they didn't. And usually the reason why they don't is because those dates are actually meaningful. 1763 is the end of the 7 Years' War, the French Indian War, right? 1783, 20 years later, is the Treaty of Paris and then the American Revolution. So without telling you, they've given you those two bookends. And I probably would have used that as my context. The context is what happened in America and the colonies between the end of the 7 Years' War and the end of the American Revolution. The way that they gave you the documents here, it doesn't work out really great. They gave them to you in order, so like at least they did that for you. But you're looking for like change over time. So like, is there something that people are saying in 1763, and then by 1783, the same sorts of people are saying something different? In this document, it turns out that they don't really give you anything really like special that way, I don't think, or at least when I read it quickly. But I was looking for it because it was a change over time essay, and they gave you those two very, very specific dates.
Try to see it was like a stronger sense of like national identity, like stronger sense of American independence, and then use the fact that you describe it as America compared to our country as like evidence of that.
So the next document we're going to look at, I want you guys to sort of do it on your own, look at it alone. Sort of give your own describes. So if you want to write a nice summary of document 3, you can. And I also want you to pull out at least one explains. So at least one audience, POV, something like that, purpose that would help develop your argument. Like how we did for the last one, we pulled out that POV. So give me one of those.
I don't mean by spoiling it, but like, is the fact that like Samuel Adams said all men have a right to remain in state, would that be a POV?
All men have a right to remain in a state of nature. That?
What's the POV?
Well, because we were talking about how like another one violated the rights of America. Like he believes that all men have a right to remain in state.
So-
In a state of nature.
So what's his point of view?
That
How is he viewing this?
he's viewing this as correct.
So what would you describe him as? Like what's his position on the sort of like the change that America goes through?
He probably believes in making further in progress of America.
Right? Or independence, right? Samuel Adams, I mean, you should know because we did just go over it, but no. Yeah. Not, that wasn't a slight, but Samuel Adams is the leader of the Sons of Liberty, right? So we know that the Sons of Liberty, this might be just his point of view. We know it's a radical independence movement, right? So we have a radical in-depth movement here. So we know his point of view and his bias is going to be very, very pro-patriot. He's going to be a very pro-independence kind of guy. And I mean, you can literally even see that from the title of the thing, the rights of colonists. They're not members of Great Britain. They've detached themselves from being a person of Great Britain. They are colonists. So keep reading, keep looking through it. See if there's something you can use to make a summary of it and pull out a nice point. Well, let's wait for the whole class to finish. The whole class of 4 people. It's on Unit 7, so it will be done relatively soon.
Are you going like backwards?
No, forward.
He has 1 through 7 done.
Why would I go backwards? Why would I start with like Reaganism and then go to like America?
I'm going backwards on the review. It's fresh in my memory.
That's not smart. How would you know how cause and effect works? Do you think labor movements cause the
Can you explain this to me?
Haymarket right? I don't know. What?
Can you explain this to me?
Why not now? What's confused? How are you? Yeah.
Can I use like
Yeah,
I
go.
feel like I'm missing something.
No, you're not missing anything. Go take a walk and come back. Go throw the baseball outside.
could I use like outside knowledge all the way back from like the pilgrims coming and why they left?
Well, I mean, it has to be relevant. How would it be relevant?
Because it's like saying how he's saying that the reason why the colonists were first established in the first place was because they felt that they weren't in a like a controlled like that
They felt that
nature.
they were basically being oppressed.
Yeah, they were
Say
being
that
oppressed,
they're-
so
If you can connect your outside evidence, it's outside evidence. But if
The only
you
thing I would be worried about is that in this particular prompt, they gave you two very specific
time periods, right?
ends to work within. So like if they're saying 1763 to 1783,
Right.
and your outside evidence comes from like 1650,
Right.
right? Like you're kind of begging them to hit you with, you see what I'm saying?
Right.
But it's not a bad idea. It's just for this particular prompt, I would try to stay within those 20 years.
all right, so how might I describe this document, Taurus?
Big supporter of American.
Pro independence of the colonies.
Yeah, right. Pro in depth. What are some key things I can pull out? What's a quote I might pull out to use in my essay?
I wrote one was the natural liberty of man is to be free from any superior power on earth. And
Yeah.
it's kind of like that.
That's a good one too. I might have picked that, but I stopped after the first sentence because I knew I was going to use the state of nature thing.
It's also the oppression still or religious to leave society. They don't want to.
Yeah.
I haven't even used my notes this entire time. So a big describing of this document, right? It's that man triumphs government, right? The nature of man, the state of man is a triumphant force over government, right? So the laws of nature supersede the laws of man or the laws of government or anything like that. So our natural inclinations overwhelm the laws of government. So one thing you might want to use here is John Locke, right? This is a key piece of outside evidence. So if you want to use Locke, which we did talk about a little bit, you want to use John Locke here, you could talk about nature, tabula rasa is a nice specific one if you want to mention it like that. Nice Latin phrase. But this is what your outside evidence could be. So that is a good example of outside evidence if you want to use something like that.
Another good strategy, by the way, when you're doing these, is that before you dig in to each document, which you have to do that obviously, but before you dig in, like read just quickly, like who all of the documents are, so that you kind of have a sense of the hand that you've been dealt. So like for me, like when I read through these, I knew that I was probably going to pair Thomas Paine, which is document 7, with document 3. Because Samuel Adams and Thomas Paine are both sort of American Enlightenment thinkers. And that kind of leads back to the whole like John Locke thing. I might have even used the Enlightenment as their bias because they're educated coastal elite types. They don't necessarily speak for the Scotch Irish in the mountains of West Virginia.
So another thing we might use, right, is republicanism, right? That sort of exchange of republicanism between the Enlightenment ideals of Europe and also the Americas. Something else we could use there, outside information as well. So, yeah.
How would you write your own John Locke? Like, how would you connect, like, kind of his works into your?
So, I mean, like, I'm a big philosophy guy, right? And I love to use it in my essays because it's so easy to. And if you have a good sense of the philosophers, especially last year in AP Euro, you could really use a lot of outside information in the DBQ. Like I would use it here. I would say Samuel Adams says something to the effect of all men have a right to remain in the state of nature, just as how Locke posits that man's state of nature should be one of the highest formalities of Earth, should be one of the highest priorities of a government, that a government does not derive its power from like divinity or anything, but through the state of man and through man's own will.
You could even go as far as to say that in the second treatise on civil government, law advocated that people have a right to revolt against unjust governments.
Yeah.
And obviously,
Also,
the
all men have a right to life, liberty, and property, as Locke. We steal that. We change property with happiness. Don't know why. It's just Jefferson.
Would you be able to also use that? as
Trying
outside
to change,
information?
trying to get by the plagiarism checker. So document 4. So Moscow and John Kim, this is all you. Yeah, no. Doc 5 is the hard one.
I like that, but
It's hard. Yeah, because you probably know what's going on.
Realism.
there are 7 documents and we're on doc 5.
About
We're
4.
actually about 4. Yes, but I'm exhausted right now. I didn't get a lot of sleep. Shut up. No,
I wanna-
we're not complaining. We're not complaining.
I wanna.
What did I get?
We can skip docs 5 and 6. I wanna at least get to this doc, and I wanna at least get to doc 7. I think doc 4 and doc 7 are one of the more important ones. Yeah, I'm doing this for you. For you. You're the one who asked me to do this entire thing.
Is that true?
Yes, it is true. Alright, I apologize.
He's not doing it for you, Troy.
All
right. All right. Read. Why are you not reading and writing? Let's go. Analyze. Let's go.
Wait, is there gonna be another one?
Yes.
Having considered with real sorrow, the happy concept.
No, why? I don't want you to read it out loud. I want you to read it, bro. Then go in the hallway or something. Fine. Well, let him read it. Read it out loud, Moscow.
Having considered with real first off the source, Quaker leaders addressed the Pennsylvania Colonial Assembly. in
What are the
January
Quakers?
1775.
Moscow. What are the Quakers? Is your name Moscow? Or the Quakers? What do you mean you don't remember?
I think what he means is he doesn't recall the information you're asking.
I have to study this.
What's a Quaker?
That'd be like
What do you
that.
mean?
Quaker oats. What do the Quaker oats look
That'd be
like?
like the teacher from Whiplash. That's what you remind me of.
Yeah, it's like I'm scared to get something wrong in front of
Why?
It's like, no, hold on, because I made this question, but I want to hear how the Quaker Oats box is gonna help anybody here.
No, I think that like oatmeal. Like I know that's what but like just all right.
Okay, so Quakers are pacifists. That's the main part.
Are you saying people who eat oats are pacifists?
I mean, I've never been. It's soggy, so it doesn't give you choking hazard. It's pacifism. Moscow, keep reading if you'd like.
Having considered with real sorrow the unhappy contest between the legislature of Great Britain and the people of these colonies, and the animosities conquest therein, we have by repeated public advices and private admonitions used our endeavors to dissuade the members of our religious society from joining with the public resolutions promoted and entered into by some of the people, which as we apprehend and so we now find have increased contention and produced great discord and confusion.
All right. What the hell does that mean?
Okay, so they're first off talking about
I highlighted some parts for you.
yeah, we're first off talking about Great Britain and the colonists and to dissuade the members of the religious society. No.
So they're like.
What does this mean? What does dissuade mean?
Like I don't know.
If I'm persuading you to do something, what am I telling you to do?
So you're telling them
So what's
not to
yeah? You're telling them not to. What are they telling them not to do?
get involved.
Get involved with what?
The differences between the two. Like Great Britain.
Get in. So it's very specific, right?
Oh, no, religious society.
So it's telling their members of religious society to not get involved with what?
Public resolutions
Which are?
promoted and entered by the people.
Yeah. So what is it?
It's pretty much independence.
What? Yeah, independence, right? The sort of calls for independence. The Quakers are saying, "Hey guys, let's not get involved." So they are saying to be peaceful,
Yeah.
and not get involved in revolution. Not get involved. So you did it. Well, how was that hard? It wasn't hard. Keep reading if you'd like.
We are therefore incited by sincere concern for the peace and welfare of our country, publicly to declare against every
You know it's on the sheets right in your hand.
What did I do? It's right there. Why can't you look at
power
it?
and authority in opposition to the laws of government and against all combinations, insurrections, conspiracies, and illegal assemblies, as we are restrained from them by the conspicuous discharge of our duty to Almighty God, by whom the kings reign and princes decree justice. We hope to remain the fidelity we owe to the king and his government, and as by law established, earnestly desiring the restoration of that harmony and concord which have heretofore united the people of these provinces.
Wait outside. What does it mean? Give me a summary of that.
So they're talking about how they want their country to have peace, right?
Yeah.
And however, they are going to listen to the king, but first off, God.
What King God? What does that mean? What is King God? We
Um,
talked about it in Euro a lot, and we just talked about it before.
So he said, "We owe to the king and his government, as by law established, earnestly desiring the restoration of that harmony." So they're pretty much saying how they want to respect the king and live up to what like he wants.
Where does the king's power come from, according to this document? Does it come from the people?
No,
Does it come from law?
God.
God. So what's that called?
Monarch.
The divine right of kings, right? A monarchy, right? So this is Britain, right? Britain is the divine right of kings.
Yes.
So this is supporting the British government. So we have support of GB. So their point of view, what's their point of view, Moscow? Divine right of kings.
That the king should be able to.
Right?
Power.
Yeah, the king is a legitimate monarch. He is under the presence of God, and God
Right,
leads him.
but, you're still confusing the two things, I think. Their point of view is that the divine right of kings is real, but that's not what you would get the POV point for. You need to point out that they're Quakers and that they were devoutly religious, and part of their religious beliefs was that they ought to have loyalty to their government, which in their time meant their king, which got their rights from God, and they're a religious group. So like the POV here is that the Quakers are religious and loyal to the King of England out of some sense of obligation or duty. Do you see like the distinction? Like like one is the bias of the author of the document, and the other is explaining what in the document is the bias.
Yeah.
So you have to do both, but you would have to point out that these are Quakers, they're religiously, like it doesn't say in the line that Quakers are religious. Like you have to understand that.
That's
Good. All right, our last document we're going to go over.
really.
No.
Aw,
John Kim.
I had good stuff for that.
John Kim, Doc 7. That's you. That's all you, man. You can read it out loud. You can read it silently. You all can read it silently. I want you to ask yourself the three questions we went over. Yep. You know what's the three questions, Moscow?
It is who's writing it, who's the audience, and how does it support my art?
I want you to think of those three questions as you start reading it. And start also maybe pulling out quotes as well as pairing up some of the documents. So start your document pairings. John Kim, you can start reading if you'd like, or you can read it independently. So, Moscow, what's the three questions?
Who's writing it, who's the audience, and how does it support the art?
You're not supposed to know. You're supposed to know.
Oh, well, it's obviously Thomas Paine who's writing it.
Okay, who is he? You just gave me a name. You just gave me a name. Like,
Who he is.
who is Thomas Paine?
Is he up there somewhere?
He's a supporter of
Are you John Kim?
It's another good place to use outside evidence if you remember that Thomas Paine wrote Common Sense. You can pull that into the
Yeah.
DBQ here too, very logically.
I remember that.
John Kim, who's
No way.
John Kim, who's Thomas Paine?
Remember that?
John Kim, who's Thomas Paine?
He's a advocator of freedom.
Freedom being.
Independence.
Don't whisper the answers to him.
I was whispering, so.
Okay. So, did you read the whole thing yet? Yeah, Moscow.
No,
He was also the archetype. I remember you saying archetype.
I don't think I said archetype.
in the essay, T. Paine was the architect.
Archipelago?
Oh, how can an island rule a continent?
That's common sense, right?
Yeah.
I'm gonna stop talking.
Archetype? Maybe he's the archetype of he's the epitome of an independence patriot. Is that might be the word I said? Or I said he had a widely distributed pamphlet.
This is what happens all the time.
Just roll with it. Take a deep breath and just carry on.
Okay, John Kim, who's my audience? He's still reading. Let's give him time. So on exam day, right, 7 documents, 15 minutes to read them. So I have to have a good pace with my documents, right? So I'd say 2 to 2.5 minutes for each of the documents. That's a conservative estimate. John Kim, who's your audience?
I'm gonna take a guess. The people.
It's probably correct too. People of what?
Not for the column.
The colonists, the American people. Right? Why is he writing this?
Because the exigence.
No, it literally
He's
is.
trying to light a fire under the colonists' ass.
Yeah.
I mean, that's really what he's doing.
It's like
And the language there is,
It's like a pregame speech.
Yeah. So
it's rhetoric. It's not even an argument. He just keeps saying things like tyranny like hell is not easily conquered. Like I mean, like that's not like that means like nothing. It's just like explosive talk to rally people to a cause, right? And then like 2 sentences later, he says, "Heaven knows how to put a proper price upon its goods. It would be strange indeed if so celestial an article as freedom should not be highly rated." Like this, like he's not making like there's nothing there. He's just like sparking the fire, which is kind of what common sense is.
yeah. And so right, his purpose is to create an emotional appeal to his audience, being the colonists, to get them to really support pro-independence talk and free them from what he deems as tyranny. And the situation, which we haven't discussed yet, the situation is what is going on at the time of this document. What's forcing him to write this document? And do you have a situation?
I have a question. So I know that the declaration was like 7 months prior to this or 6 months prior, but then did something happen like where it was ratified? And so could you use that as an example of how like now that they have to go back to war, which is why he's
Did
trying
they
to
start fighting?
like
Yeah, no.
Declaration is ratified as it's signed.
Oh no,
Yeah.
when is it like revoked? Is it ever revoked now?
What do you mean?
Still think today, so not.
The Declaration of Independence, like it was first enforced and everyone thought like the war was over.
It doesn't
But
carry
then they
the
ended up-
force of law, but it's never.
Wait, do you mean the Treaty of Paris? The Declaration of Independence is the Americans saying that we've tried
I
everything.
think what he's getting at is that, like, when does this get abrogated? Like the Articles of Confederation are eventually abrogated by the Constitution.
Yeah.
It's not replaced
Yeah.
by the Constitution. It's not even it's not a legal document in the sense that the Constitution is.
Yeah.
Like courts don't make rulings based on what is written in the Declaration of Independence in the United States today.
Yeah.
But it's still a document that, like, it's never undone. It's permanent, which is why we're still an independent country.
So the situation that went on that prompts Thomas Paine to write this is the Americans are losing. They're getting beaten up in a lot of these battles they're facing. The American War for Independence starts off bad for the Americans. They are not together. They lose a lot of militiamen, and especially with the Summer Soldier and the Sunshine Patriot, we didn't go over those specifically. Those are specific allusions to other works. So the Summer Soldier is the sort of Roman idea where you plant your crops, go to fight for the summer, and then you come home and your crops are grown. So this is a war not too long for them. This is a war where they fight and they come back to their great country, right? They come back to their families, their friends, etc. Thomas Paine is saying that they must come at this with full force. They must really do this. They must feel the fever of American spirit and fight the tyrannical British.
Do
So
you know
that
who he's quoting at the end?
Britain with an army to
No, the
enforce.
last, like, 5 words, to bind us in all cases whatsoever is in quotes.
I think it's Pitt, William Pitt. He's quoting. I think it's a letter from it might be George III to Pitt or something like that. William Pitt is the prime minister of Britain at the time of prior to revolution. All right, so that's document 7. That is the last document So what you guys can do, if you want to, you can write an essay or write a practice DBQ on this, and you can get it back to me, and I will grade it for you. And I'm going to literally peer edit it, and I will give you a grade based on the rubric. I highly recommend you do this since you guys haven't written a DBQ yet, and it will be really good practice for you to write one.
Oh, like an APUSH.
I've seen, we haven't done much.
You're funny.
Oh, I have, but it was awful.
So let's get this done, right? Please don't give it to me like the day of the exam, because I will be doing other things. Yeah, I will try. You can type it. I recommend you handwrite it. These are little DBQ sort of pamphlets you can use. You should honestly try to time yourself too.
I have more. You said we have an hour.
You should, your writing time for your first one, you should make it an hour.
You
But-
definitely want to time yourself when you're practicing this.
Yeah.
Like, and give yourself like some kind of regimentation, like set yourself up. Like the way that I usually do it is that I don't think the writing is the hard work. The hard work is the thinking and organizing your thoughts. Like, so I'll spend like the first 15 minutes just reading and marking up the documents. And then I'll spend another 5 or 10 minutes writing my outline, including outside evidence, POV, where I might go for like the context point, like all that stuff. And then like in my head, like no later than like 35 minutes left, I have to be started writing. So like in my head, like I'm watching the clock and I know where I should be throughout the hour, but I know that I need at least 35 minutes to write it, which means I have 25 minutes to get ready. So I can use 15 minutes to read the documents, mark them up, take another 10 minutes to write the outline, and then go into it. I would definitely write an outline, because if you're used to typing this stuff up, when you make a mistake typing, you can like highlight and move whole paragraphs really easily. You can't do that on a handwritten exam. So like the outline is really, really, really helpful. Plus, like if you forget a point, like once you start writing, it's gonna be too late to go back. But you can check your outline, like do I have 3 issues of POV? Like do I have 1 outside evidence? And like you can kind of like check them off, like before you commit to writing, you've already got like the map of how you're gonna get all the points on your outline.
And please also, when you're writing it, after you do like something, so if I give a summary of like doc 1 or something, at the end of that sentence, if you could put like describes, like,
The marking.
yeah, it's like describes, and then like
I would definitely at least label
I don't know what the hell that was.
the
Yeah.
thesis, the context point, and the outside evidence.
let's just
How do I like differentiate the contextualization paragraph from like my intro, my thesis?
I mean, it depends on the prompt, but sometimes it makes more sense to put it in the intro. You just
So I
have to
can
make,
put it in.
yeah, what you have to be careful of is that, I think it even says it on your rubric, or the rubric that Nick has up there, that you can't earn the point for just 1 or 2 sentences broadly describing the period. So if you put it in your intro with your thesis,
So very long.
make sure that you're giving it enough weight to get the context point. The reason I like to do it as a separate paragraph is because you can't write a paragraph with 1 sentence. Like you're gonna notice that. But you're right, like if you're trying to save time, if it makes sense for the prompt, you should put it in the
So I
intro.
just like, usually my like intro is basically context, like
Yeah.
context. So I don't.
Just make sure you give yourself enough real
Yeah.
estate.
make sure also you're citing your documents. So if you quote something, make sure you're putting in quotation marks at the end of it, document, and then whatever number it is. So document 5. Okay, and that is our. So if I quote Thomas Paine, if I say like heaven or something like that, I'm gonna put at the end of the document, doc in parentheses, doc 2, period. Okay. All right. So that is our little review session for the thing. So I will now end the recording.